I'm in the ambulance, I get to the hospital, I'm on the operating table, and I clinically died.
You're talking about another dimension of your sort of belief system and experiences that feed into how you approach leadership.
A lot of what I learned about leadership, I really picked up when I was working with special ed. It's really, that's where the formation, the foundation for my philosophy of leadership was honed there, because I realized there's something quite amazing going on in the way that I was working as a special ed teacher.
Welcome to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast, hosted by Andrew Cohn. Andrew is a trusted counselor, coach, and consultant who works with leaders and teams to increase productivity and fulfillment in the workplace. If you'd like to connect with Andrew about individual or team coaching, leadership workshops, or team alignment, please go to www.lighthouseteams.com. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I speak with Steve Hart. Steve is in the Philadelphia area, and he spent over 30 years as an executive at the Federal Reserve in Philadelphia. He talks about his vast experience personally as a practicing Catholic, talking about the imperative of the human side in business and people bringing the best of themselves to their workplace. He describes how he learned about leadership as a special education teacher. And teachers need to be both warriors and artists and build great trust. And he talks about how leadership in the organizational world involves that as well. It's just a font of knowledge about different models of leadership and education. He talked about his experience helping to transform leadership to support a knowledge worker-focused organization, which was a big cultural shift that happened at the Federal Reserve, including something called the Zoysia grass principle, with which I was not familiar. And I invite you to learn about that. Very straightforward, very clear, very vulnerable. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome back to the Spirituality and Leadership podcast. This is Andrew Cohn, and today I am with Steve Hart, my colleague and friend. There are some stories to tell, but mostly I want him to tell his stories. Steve is a coach to leaders at all levels. He's been in this space for a very long time, 34 years at the Federal Reserve Bank, all in Philadelphia, I believe. But he may talk a bit about his experience initially as a high school music teacher and then as a special education teacher in boarding school, which, as he has told me, all I learned about leadership, I learned being a special ed teacher. And Steve joins us from his home in the Philadelphia area. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad we've reconnected after some years and that you're resonating with what's happening here. And I know that you have some wisdom and stories to share. So I'm super grateful for your being with us. And I think where I'd like to start is what led you to sort of ping me back and say, hey, I would like to be a part of this conversation. What was resonant for you? I have some notes of our conversation that we had recently, but I'd love to hear just broadly where you'd like to start.
Yeah, well, I love this idea that spirituality and leadership are connected, that there's a visceral connection between those two things. But I am a very religious person. I did convert to Catholicism many years ago, but I wouldn't say I'm a devout Catholic, but I'm certainly a practicing Catholic. And so I understand that side of spirituality, but I'm really interested in the human spirit of an enterprise, the idea that people bring the best of themselves, their capabilities, their hopes, dreams, and aspirations. And we spend so much time in our workplaces. Shouldn't it reward us in some way in terms of feeling that we're contributing to something significant and giving our talents in a way that honors our own spirit? I think is a critically important part of this. So when I saw you were embarking on this kind of journey and those kinds of conversations with people, I thought I'd love to be part of that, because I certainly have listened to these podcasts. I think they're fantastic, and you're doing a great job of illuminating some of these ideas. So thank you for that. And thank you for giving the chance to be part of it.
Of course, it's a pleasure. And I hear you talking about the connection between certain types of fulfillment in the workplace with that. I mean, you said human spirit of an enterprise, and then went on to talk about essentially fulfillment and feeling like our talents are being used for a certain purpose, and that connects back to the human spirit. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly
Yeah.
the circuit I envision. Yes.
Beautiful. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your story. You know, you hide it well, your Yorkshire accent. You hide it well, but I'm sure it creeps out at certain times. But you know, your life path has been a bit different. You've had a couple of momentous events that you may talk about, some of which you've turned into song and shared with me. But share a little bit about your story, please, and how you came to this place, both in terms of your professional experience and your personal philosophy.
Yeah, well, I said in my to you before we started that a lot of what I learned about leadership I really picked up when I was working with special ed. It's really that's where the formation, the foundation for my philosophy of leadership was honed there, because I realized there's something quite amazing going on in the way that I was working as a special ed teacher. And it was around that time that I discovered the work of Barry Johnson on
Mhm.
polarity management. And I saw in a very visceral way how polarity management, the ability to hold two ideas in the head at the same time and maximize the attention to both, was a critical component of teaching in special education. And I put it down to needing to be both a warrior and an artist. The idea that there were certain things, behavioral traits, there were aspects of the way that children behaved with one another, how they acted in the classroom, how they approached their learning, the disciplines, if you will, of giving them the right conducive experience for learning had to be somewhat imposed upon them because they weren't going to necessarily go there themselves. So that was the warrior part. The artist part was understanding that there's a deep level of empathy required to bring special education kids to an ability to take command and control of their own learning path. So I found out that the teachers that were most successful in my cadre of faculty at the time were those who could span that duality really well. They could be both warrior and artist in the classroom with these kids. And of course, we lived with them all year long because it was a boarding school. So it wasn't just the 6 hours, 7 hours of the day in the classroom. It was about life itself.
So the opportunity to influence and engage at a whole different range of the course of life rather than just in the
Yeah.
classroom.
Yeah. And the basis of it was that as a teacher of special ed, the most fundamental important part of your ability to get these kids to sort of be responsive and take accountability for the learning was they needed to feel that you trusted them and that they could trust you as a teacher. And I thought, wow, isn't that what leadership is all about today? Isn't that the way in
Mm.
which leaders, it's very difficult for any leader in any organization to do anything worthwhile if they don't feel, if they're not trusted and that they don't convey trust to others. So that realization by the wonderful work of Barry Johnson has sort of stayed with me for a long, 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 long time. And it's carried through in how I formulated my own philosophy of leadership, how it imbued my teaching, because I was 26 years an adjunct professor at several universities, teaching human capital leadership and strategy, marketing, a number of other types of things where it was really about building something and creating something in a business-like environment that was meaningful and purposeful for the people involved in it. So I've always been this believer in inclusion, the idea that everybody has something valuable to offer, has a skill, talent that needed to be used. It might be hidden and under the surface, but your job as a leader is to help that to come out, to develop it and grow it and nurture it and give people the right kinds of experiences for them to be successful in their occupations.
Hmm. Wow. So you've just said a lot. And so it's interesting when you talk about the warrior and the artist, and I love that framing. It sounds to me uh, relatedly, and I'd like to hear your thoughts about this. Warrior and artist sounds to me a bit like hard and soft. It sounds perhaps a little bit like doing and being. I don't want to be reductive, as my son would sometimes accuse me of being reductive, but it's a little bit like that. But then underlying all of that is none of it works without a feeling of trust, a feeling of openness, a feeling of like willingness to open and participate, be vulnerable, which is what learning is about. And that's what I'm hearing. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, I think you're right, except the lines between warrior and artist are not quite so black and white.
Fair.
There's a certain amount of nuance around that. That's sort of reading the
Sure.
room correctly, knowing what's called
Mm.
for in this moment,
Mm.
reacting in the right way through trial and error, being perhaps more emergent in the way that we do that. So they're not black and white states. We can often go from one
Right.
state to the other in the same conversation. So
Mm.
it's part of a plan of self-awareness, I would think, on behalf of a leader to be able to navigate through dualities like in that form, to be able to know what's called for in this moment. In this moment, I need to be the warrior. And in this next
Mm.
moment now, I need to be the artist, and being able to switch seamlessly between those ideas and act accordingly in a way that is brings out the best in the person you're having that conversation with.
Mm. And in a senior people leader role at the Federal Reserve Bank, um, how have you seen leaders navigate that? How have you seen them develop and practice and demonstrate that level of self-awareness so that they can navigate effectively between these and perhaps other paradigms as well?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working in the HR department for 16 years of my 34 years at the Fed. And I tell people that those were the most meaningful 16 years of my Fed existence. But I love the place itself. It was a wonderful place to be. It's a very old, historic organization with a
Mm.
great mission and some wonderful, amazing, talented, and very smart folks to work with. So it was a great pleasure and honor to be there. But working in HR, I got to bit behind the scenes of this human psyche of this just a little bit. And I got to be able to work with some leaders um, at a time in the organization when we were making a shift from a more operationally centered enterprise to a more human capital oriented enterprise, where we're becoming more of a knowledge worker economy as opposed to a transactional one. And there were a lot of leaders who were caught in the wave of that happening. And the Fed was a steeply hierarchical organizational command and control was a way in which things got done, and it worked very, very successfully for many, many, many years. And we had great leaders who could do that with empathy and what have you. But as we started to see the work of the Philadelphia Fed change from the operationally centered to a more human, or more to a human capital type of thing, or intellectual aspect of this, the command and control thing needed to lose its power a little bit. And we noticed that what attracted people to the Fed was the opportunity to do really incredible work and do it in a way that honored their contribution to it as opposed to being told what to do. So it was really about helping a lot of leaders who were very, very smart and very capable, but really learning to let go a little bit of what had gotten them where they are. That what got them to this point isn't necessarily going to get them to the next stage of leadership in this new changing demographics of the workplace. And so we spend a lot of time having conversations. Lots of coaches like yourself would come in and help us with some of those things with those leaders who were embracing this idea. It wasn't that they didn't know about it, but they said, look, we need some help to be able to help us conceptualize how we might operate differently as a leader in this organization and make that transformation or that change. And so it was about giving people the psychologically safe space to have the conversations that really challenge what the notions of leadership were and what it was needed in terms of their presence as a leader to build and create a different kind of work experience for those that were in now the organization and doing more uh, knowledge-based applications of work in lots of different arenas. So it was really about, I think, creating. It was about asking the right questions more than anything else, really, and letting the leaders themselves solve the problem through facilitated conversations and talking through and supportive one another on how we're going to do that. And of course, it translated then into how we promote people to future leadership positions, how we recruit people into the organization who want to be there. So ultimately, these tentacles led to lots of transformation and change in the way that the organization presents itself. Diversity inclusion was another thing that needed to come very much in there too.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was real. This is my term that I'm hearing is a culture shift.
Yeah, it was. It
Per,
was
per,
deeply cultured. Yeah.
and it sounds also you use the term demographic. So was it the demographic shift that you were recognizing that was the organization that prompted the organization to make this change?
I think so. Plus the work that the Fed was called upon to do. I want to get too deeply into the operations side, but the Fed plays a very critical role in the nation's payment system, and there's a lot of systems and structures that go along with that. And Philadelphia at the time was a prominent player in that role. And but the centers of power around that shifted, and Philadelphia found that it had to reinvent itself, if you will, because the operations had moved to another area, and now Philadelphia needed to make a contribution in a new way to the Federal Reserve System. And we found that came through through research, through ability to connect more with our community, and to build different types of value that the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia could offer to the community in which we served. And it brought with it a complete shift in the kind of skills, abilities, and leadership that was needed in order to make that happen.
Mm, beautiful. Another great example of how the great city of Philadelphia reinvents itself and adjusts to be
Yeah.
current and leading. Um, so you spoke about psychological safety as a necessary condition, if you will, to engage leaders to behave differently, to try new behaviors, etc. And I'm curious to know and one way that you specifically mentioned was asking the right questions, facilitated conversations, helping those leaders to emerge with their own answers as opposed to being told what to do. I'm wondering if there's anything else you might share about what helped create the conditions within which those leaders were able to step into a new type of leadership. Because as you said, it's a difficult thing to let go of, well, this is the way we've always done things before. You don't pivot right away. What helps with that transition and invites leaders to shift?
Yeah, well, fortunately for me, at the time this was all taking place, we got a new president of the organization, and the good news is that this new president who came in was an academic who had great from the Philadelphia area, who was I guess a user of the Federal Reserve work prior to him becoming president of the Fed. So he kind of had a deep insight into how the organization works and what we produce and how it gets produced. And when he became the president of the bank, I wasn't present during his interview, but I was certainly there after he arrived. And he started just sort of different messages to the workforce in terms of this is our need for change. This is our time to think differently about the thing. So the first thing that I was blessed with was a senior leader, the most senior leader in the organization, recognizing that this shift was needed. And that's surprising how important that is in terms of driving the bus in the cultural stakes. Because if the most senior people in the organization are not committed to making a directional shift, then it's probably going to be eaten for lunch, as they say in the parlance, right? So I think the most incredible part was a senior most leader who had a powerful and compelling vision of the need for change. And not only did he have that powerful vision, he also created, I would say, a really nice invitation to participate in building that together. And gave people like myself who were in a position to help with this the power and authority to help drive the change that would be needed. And our thought was it starts with small conversations with a small cadre of people who are well committed to that. Let's get some successes under our belt. Let's get some wins and start to see that. And the momentum will build, and we'll be able to. I called it my Zoysia grass principle of leadership. Are you familiar with Zoysia grass where you
I'm
are?
not. That does not sound like it's from Yorkshire, though. Please say
No,
more.
it's not. It's not a Yorkshire thing, but it's very prominent here in the Philadelphia area. Zoysia
Ah,
grass is actually a weed, but it's a beautiful looking lawn. It doesn't take a lot of tending and caring. But what's interesting about zoysia grass is not its properties, but the way in which it works. You don't need to rip up your old lawn if you want to create a zoysia grass lawn. You simply plant plugs of it in different parts of your lawn, and its influence just spreads, and ultimately it just takes over. And I thought that was a beautiful metaphor for how this leadership culture transformation was going to take place. It was going to take place by well-positioned uh, plugs of information and action and commitment, and in the right places at the right time. And that influence would spread. And by that spreading, they would then meet up with other influences that were going on, and we would ultimately reach a tipping point in the ability to have the new culture emerge in the organization. And that's precisely kind of what happened. Didn't happen overnight, but the Zoysia grass principle is sort of something in my head that I glommed onto that I think is just a great way of illustrating how this principle works.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. I wasn't aware of that. And that's such an interesting way to describe it. And again, another, as we talk about often in our work out here in Santa Fe, another way of looking at nature for solutions.
Correct. Yeah, I
and
mean,
certainly models as well.
Yeah, nature and the universe are wonderful examples of how things work. You know, quantum physics is a big part of what I believe in leadership too. The emergent properties of quantum physics are something I believe in, and I think that also has a connection to leadership.
Well, so you're talking about another dimension of your sort of belief system and experiences that feed into how you approach leadership. And maybe this would be a good time to talk about something you told me about previously, namely a particular experience you had where you almost left us in this world,
Yeah.
and that changed you as you shared with me. So I wonder if you could speak about that.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I've only just recently, this happened a long time ago in my life, but I've only just fairly recently, the last 5 or 6 years, started to talk more openly about this experience. And as you know, I kind of wrote a song about it
Hmm.
later and now I sing it on my various performances that I do, and actually will be performing in Yorkshire in
Hmm.
September. But yes, I was as a child, I grew up in my mother died when I was very young, and my dad remarried again when I was about 7 or 8 years old. So there was a period of time there where I was living with just my dad and then my aunts and uncles and my grandparents. And the combination of all as loving and as caring as they all were was very turbulent and challenging times for me. And I started to have a lot of problems emotionally and psychologically. And you know, I think I had a form of dyslexia, I had a bit of learning difficulties. The turbulence of all that and the upheaval of it and led me to become a very nervous child. You know, and I would have a nosebleed at the drop of a hat very easily, and always was doubting myself in my abilities to do anything. And that carried with me for quite a bit. And then I went to university in England. I went to Durham University in England, and I'm the first person in my family, in fact, only the second person in my high school to go to university,
Wow.
which was quite a thing. And I had an immediate sense of, what am I doing here? I really don't belong here. But the impetus behind that came from my dad. My dad was a steel worker, and he wanted me to understand what the stakes were for getting into the steelwork. So one day when I was in before I'm making my career decisions, before leaving high school, he takes me to the steelworks where he works and takes me around, introduces me to all his friends, and I hear all this noise, the smells, the bangs, the heat. It was just awful. But my dad very proudly came up to me. I said, "So what do you think? What do you think?" And I went, "Yeah, I guess it's all right." And my dad never hit me in his life, but he grabbed me by the coat, pulled me up off my feet, and said, "You come anywhere near this place, I will kick your ass." And that was my impetus to say, okay, I might need to think about going on somewhere. So I go to college. I'm in my last year of college, and I come home for the Easter break, and I'm not feeling well. I just feel really, I feel like I had the flu. And I was working on a play scheme at the time with kids and actually riding a bike back and forth. I came home on the Thursday night, I think it was, and got into my house, and I was delirious with fever
Hmm.
and thought I had the flu, went to bed. During the night, I had severe pain. Woke my dad up at the time, who phoned for an ambulance. And in England at that time, the doctor comes to your house. The doctor is called, and he immediately says, yeah, it's something to do with his appendix. We need to get him anyway. I'm in the ambulance. I get to the hospital. I'm on the operating table, and I clinically died. I ended up having, it was gangrenous peritonitis that had been
Wow.
stewing in the abdomen. And I was really, really sick, much sicker than I realized I was. But I had this experience of a near-death experience. And it was very clear to me what happened, but I came back from that. But what was interesting about it, I was completely transformed when I came back. I was no longer that nervous kid. I no longer had nosebleeds. I no longer felt, I don't know, unworthy of opportunity and people to work with. I became a people person in true sense of the word, and I developed a side of myself that I never knew was possible. And it just seemed to come very naturally, all in that one moment of transformation and change. And I kind of lived the benefit of that ever since. It's inspired my entire life from that point on. And it's only recently that I started to sort of realize the implications of that and the impact of it. So that was a very visceral and very deep um, experience that I think is the sort of the founding story of my transformation and change from my nervous, uh, challenging kid types of things into something more permanent. And my academic performance went up considerably after that too. Lots of things happened that suddenly I was able to do that I could never think of doing before.
That's what a remarkable story. That's so amazing, and it sounded cathartic and transformative, and um, obviously sort of inexplicable. I suppose medical people may be able to explain how it happened, but how did you? I mean, this is a bit of a personal question, but did you share with your dad what happened and how it was different? And could he relate to it at all? What was that like for a
Yeah,
a teenage boy and his steelworker dad to talk about an experience like that?
yeah. Well, what I didn't tell you was that what I had was what my mother died of.
Hmm.
And so uh, my dad, while I was in the hospital, he already knew, I think, what this sign was like because he lived through it with my mother.
I
And
see.
he saw repeated in me what he had experienced with her, you know. Um, uh, and so I think my dad was a very spiritual man. And I think he had a connection with in his mind with God that he very much, I think, recognized what was going on here. But I think his faith and his what he prayed for while I was in that situation did have a bearing on the outcome. I do believe
Hmm.
that he knew what was going on. My dad was also this. A lot of your listeners might not know this, but my dad was a St. John's ambulance brigader in the UK, which is a sort of a first responder as well as being a steel worker. And so he had some medical training. He understood. So I think my dad saw this emerging, and that's why the doctor was called. Otherwise, he might just have poo-pooed. Oh, he just got the flu. But I think he saw something that made him take this drastic action that led to me getting to the hospital. But so it was an easy conversation to have with my dad, and it was something he and I shared pretty much only with him up until he died in 2003. That he knew that I'd had this experience, and I confided in him in it, and he believed me, and he always trusted that that was absolutely, I
Hmm.
wasn't imagining, you know.
Hmm. That's so beautiful because I've heard people share their stories of these spiritual experiences, for lack of a better term. There's other ways to describe it that are so difficult to explain, and in their families of origin in particular, they're not met with
Right.
what their experience is, et cetera. And what a wonderful thing to share with your dad. And what I'm hearing is, on the
Right.
one hand, he was very practical. He could see it coming. He could ask for help in a way that perhaps another parent wouldn't. And at the same time, he's asking for help from other sources as well,
Yeah.
um, and praying for some resolution. However, he may have done that. That whatever it was, it took hold. So thank God for that.
Yeah. I read a book several years after that. It was called Life After Life, and when I read that book, I thought, wow, there's so many of these experiences similar
Hmm.
to my own. That it's a recounting of the people who've had these similar types of experiences, and it was just remarkable how similar my experiences was to them. But I was talking about it well before I knew the book was out.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And years later, one of the things that, as I understand, that your practice and your faith has led you to is Cranaleith. So could
Yeah,
you talk a little bit about that, please?
yeah. Cranaleith is a place in Northeast Philadelphia. It's actually a, a retreat center run by the Sisters of Mercy, but it's non-denominational. The idea
Hmm.
that all of us need a place to reflect and renew and connect and take action in a meaningful way to fulfill our lives' dreams and ambitions and goals. And we have 25 years now at Cranaleith. I've been associated with it for maybe 22 or 23 years of its existence. And it's a retreat center in Northeast Philadelphia, 10 acres of beautiful land, formerly sacred property of the Lenape Indian tribe that lived here in the Philadelphia area. And also the home of American suffrage, because there's a house on the property that was built by or designed by the first female architect in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
And Susan B. Anthony was a good friend of the woman who owned the property, and she would come up often, and they discussed American suffrage in that house. So the house has got a powerful connection of freedom and the ability to be inclusive. And so that tradition has continued through the mission of Cranaleith, which is to inspire and bring hope to people on the margins of society, or anybody who's feeling the need to feel connected in any way, whether that's a person with who's homeless, or a person who is a business titan who needs to connect with more important and deeper reasons why he or she is doing what they do. So we cater to everybody. In a way, it's through a collection of programs, using our space as a way for organizations to conduct their own strategic planning retreats and have time in the quiet and peaceful 10-acre property that we have, just to renew and revive their spirit and soul around the purpose and meaning of what they're doing. So we have this wonderful resource here. And 6 years ago, I was asked to be chairman of the board of that organization, and I've proudly done that the last 6 years. And I'm supposed to be ending my tenure, but they asked me to stay on for one more year, which I'm pleased to do, because this was our gala year and we needed to raise some money to keep the place going. And nobody wanted to talk about leadership succession at that point. So I'm in it for another year, but I will continue to be part of it, even though I won't be chairman of the board anymore next year. It's just a wonderful example of, and the stories are legend, of the people that come to the property uh, in Philadelphia, and have such a deep experience of finding purpose and meaning in what they're doing through the contemplative process that exists there, and which is unfolds for them as they come in, and using the grounds, using again nature as a way to inspire that growth and that connection with people is beautiful to see.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I remember visiting Cranaleith some years ago. I didn't even know about the vast history of the place. I came there with a social services organization that I was supporting with culture change and leadership alignment work with that organization. And we came to the property. I remember it being quite wonderful, and just pulling onto the property, like, what is this place in the middle of,
Yes.
on one side is a suburban neighborhood, and there's the Roosevelt Boulevard thing is close by. It's like, well, it's a fascinating place. But before we pivot from there, I would love to. Could you please share if someone wants to learn more about Cranaleith, what's a website or a place that they could go to?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say Cranaleith is an unusual word. People don't know that's a Gaelic word. There's a lot of Irish influence in the way that Cranaleith is set up. It's Gaelic for sanctuary of trees, and
Hmm.
it's spelled Cranaleith. That's the spelling of it. So the website is simply www.cranaleith.org.
Hmm.
That's it.
Cool. Yeah, just never know who may want to check it out. So
Yeah,
great.
we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, all the normal thing, LinkedIn you'd expect. So we have outlets in all of those areas too. So search on us and find us, and hopefully people will get a way to get engaged. We're always looking for great board members. We're always looking for members to serve on the President's Council, and we're always looking for volunteers. So Philadelphia folks, get motivated, get in there. Let's see you.
Well, and maybe there's some contributions of different
Yeah,
types that
maybe
those of
donors
us
too.
from
We're looking for donors. Always looking for donors.
some people from way outside the Philadelphia area might be able to contribute. Great. I'm curious to know what is your experience? I mean, your personal experience with religion is connected to, it seems to me, your experience at Cranaleith. Um, I believe you've talked about that, and I'm curious to know how your experience at Cranaleith feeds into some of your work with the more corporate types who, if they have not been out to Cranaleith, if they have not experienced this other side, this nature informed, the energy and the presence of the nuns who live there, the more corporate types. And I'm wondering how you bring some of that energy and philosophy that happens over in Cranaleith into the more corporate spaces. How you bridge
Yeah,
some of those gaps.
right. I got connected with Cranaleith through a person in Philadelphia who was an executive coach who I was going to hire at the Fed to do some work for us, who was also a volunteer facilitator at,
Hmm.
and she came over for lunch at the Fed one day, and we had this conversation. And she said, "Oh, you might be interested in this place I know of in Northeast Philly, and I do some pro bono work there. And by the way, there's a great program coming up next week. If you're interested, they're looking for some participants to this pilot program that's coming. It's called Work and Spirit. Was the program name?" And she said it's aimed at people in corporations who are looking for a more meaningful connection to their work and to what they're doing. And she said, "I think you'd be the right person to experience this, and maybe you'll enjoy it." And so I went along to this thing, having never been to Cranaleith before. And just as I got there that morning, there was a monumental snowstorm. And we were sitting in, at the time, it was just the house at Cranaleith that was available. We had this time period where the facilitators of the program said, uh, "We want you to spend an hour this afternoon after lunch thinking about some critical questions about your own contributions to life from work and your leadership role. And we want, obviously it's a bad day to go outside, but there's plenty of room in the house to find a room. But if you feel like you want to go outside, do it anyway." Well, I was one of those that did it anyway. I was the only one in the group, and I put on my parka and my boots, and I went out into the snow. And I just had this realization that our workplaces are very often devoid of human spirit. That they're a frenetic focus on results and outcomes, and not really very empathetic towards the people that work there. And I felt very strongly that what our workplaces need are an infusion of the human spirit in order to make them more palatable and meaningful for people in their work. So this program called the Work and Spirit series was the impetus behind my vision for that. The idea that this is a way to do it. This is a way that we can bridge that divide. And it's not a spiritual conversation, believe it or not. It's really about, again, creating a series of questions that are deeply reflective, maybe getting back through, going back to triple loop learning ideas that we want to get back to the fundamentals of who we are and why we're here and what we're doing. And we help people to go back through that cycle of experience and help to find connections as to how they got to where they are. And now that they've got a clear understanding of how they got there, where do they want to go next in a way that is going to honor them and honor the people around them, is going to make them feel proud of how they're spending their time in their workplace, and not be a victim of the workplace, but find a connection to it in a way that's different than the one that they have today. So that's been the vision for this Work and Spirit series that has continued on. It's part of our current day mission within the Cranaleith cadre of programs to help people to make that connection and find that purpose and that meaning. We've just had a very, very successful 3 seminar series with a bunch of folks from Jefferson University hospitals and the nursing population, who you might imagine is still reeling from the impact and the effects of the COVID-19 experience. And we've given them an opportunity to come and reflect upon that experience and renew their spirit around why they were called into this wonderful career of nursing and caring for other people. And some of them lost touch with it during that intense period of time. And through the facilities of Cranaleith and the good work of the facilitators, they reconnected in a way that was very powerful and beautiful to see. And so it's that kind of that kind of respite, that kind of oasis, that kind of place that renews people's spirit. And I think it's just about the privilege of giving people time, getting away from the day-to-day activities. And just as you well know with your own work, this space contributes so much to the power of healing of the mind and heart, and gets people renewed into the spirit of hope and intention of making, and then collaborating. So people from the same experience together, learning together, now mutually supportive as they reemerge into the workplace and speaking a common language. It's all beautiful to see.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I'm listening to this. I don't know that I have anything to add other than to say beautiful. And I just hope that the work can get out there broadly. And if this helps with that, terrific. And I hear you emphasizing a word that I've heard numerous times in our conversation here, is reflection, and the impact of reflection, and the time for reflection, and that protected space to think and to feel and to consider and to ask the deeper questions.
Right. I always tell my students, if you're not reflecting, then you're not learning. You're just relentlessly going through with blinders on, straight forward, without really paying attention to what's going on around you. And so there's taking purposeful pauses in our active and daily lives to truly think and reflect upon the purpose and the meaning behind what we're doing. I find to be a meditative practice in many ways that is so essential for the health and well-being of our heart and soul. And you know, people who work in corporations are no less needing that kind of spirit to be able to survive and thrive in their workplace, because it's challenging to be there. We're randomly thrown together with people in an organization, and you have to learn to get along if you want to be successful. And I was disturbed always to see the Gallup surveys that always show that only about 32% of people in organizations really want to be there. And, you know, a vast number of people would rather be somewhere else or not there at all. And when you ask the question, why is that? It's the way I'm treated. It's the way I'm perceived, or it's the person that manages me. They don't know how to get the best out of me. And those types of things. That's a sad commentary on our workplaces that are so vibrant to our physical economy, but so depleting of our human economy and our human spirit economy. And we want to build up the spirit of humanness within our organizations. And I think together it'll become a new duality. We can be both physically economical, and we can also be spiritual in our approach and survive those two things. They don't have to be either or choices. They can become both and.
Mm. Yeah, no, beautiful. And for the benefit of the individual who feels fulfilled and engaged and making a contribution. And I'm going to be a better worker for you if
Yes.
this is how I'm showing up at work. This is not a feel-good thing. This is a
Right.
so that thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I tell people, I wrote an article about this some years ago when I was teaching at University of Pennsylvania, and I the word the buzzword in HR in my time in the HR was it's all about attraction and retention, right? Well, that is true, but I thought the word retention was not a good choice of word for what we really need to do. I thought retention to me feels like you're holding somebody against their will.
Mm-hmm.
So I turned that around a little bit. I said, no, what we really need is attraction and attention. So it's about attending to the needs of once we've taken all of this hard work to get great people to join our organizations, once we've got them into the fold, we tend to turn off our attention to them and hope that our systems that we already have in place will hold them there. I think if leaders can change from attraction to attention and can learn to be adaptive, learn to be adept at being able to navigate through chaos and change, and give people a sense of purpose and belonging, and take advantage of the hidden talents that everybody comes into the organization with, then people are going to feel more ready to want to stay in a place like that. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do anything to retain them. They'll stay by their own volition because they feel, yeah, this is a place that honors me. This is a place that gives me purpose and meaning in what I'm doing. I want to be here because I get a return on my soul for being in this organization. And I thought that's a lofty vision, I know, and probably unrealistic, but I think we have to be audacious in our thinking around what's possible.
No, I love the return on my soul equation, if you will, as you explain it. Just one word that I want to open up that you just mentioned. If leaders can be adaptive, can you talk more about what that means in this context?
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, that could be a podcast all by itself, couldn't it? No,
Okay, maybe it will be.
yeah, yeah. I discovered a long time ago wonderful work by Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky called "Leadership on the Line: Staying Alive Through the Dangers of Leading." And they have a wonderful model in there about what adaptive leadership is all about. And the model itself it's pretty straightforward to grasp, not easy to state without having a picture of it. But imagine the idea that you've got leaders are disturbing equilibrium in organizations to generate the need for change. And most people in organizations, what they really want to do is return to the status quo. They really wanted to go back to normal as quickly as possible. But what adaptive leaders do, they have the ability to hold people in an area which he calls productive zone of distress in order for them to continue to keep learning and growing and practicing and learning new ways of working. And adaptive leaders have the ability to hold people in that place, and they change the temperature. They either raise it or lower it depending on the situation. But the whole idea is not letting people off the hook to return to the way they always were. It's about creating a space. Again, it's all about security and psychological safety and experimentation. But the whole idea is that leaders have the capacity and the ability to challenge people to stay in that learning mode until they ride out this wave of discontent or discomfort and find that they can now they've got a new value and a new way of thinking about things and not return to the normal way that their psychology would hope that they could do quickly. So that's what I mean by adaptive, the ability to hold people in a place, create a container that allows for transformation and change through worthy conversations and exchanges of ideas, and bring people out to new realizations and new possibilities. And that's what adaptive work is all about. And again, it's inspired by Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky in that book.
Yeah, I know that I remember an article of I think it was Heifetz, I think with Linsky called "The Real Work of Leadership," and that article talked about the balcony versus the dance floor,
Yeah.
and it also talked about the need to just turn up the heat at times, and I think that's related to what you're sharing. But wonderful. And so, but what I hear is implicit in that, though, for a leader to do that effectively is to have that type of self-awareness that you talked about earlier, where how can I be aware of what's happening with me? And how can I be aware of what's happening with them so that I can know, am I dialing up? Am I dialing it down? How much is enough? How much is too much?
Yes, exactly right. It's about that self-awareness, that ability to uh, accept and acknowledge feedback from those that you work with so that you know what it will take to keep that individual engaged in that learning space. And it's critically important to be self-aware with what your tendencies are, what your own habits are as a leader, and not let them dominate or bias you in any way in terms of what might emerge from the collective minds of the people involved in the change effort. And it's very difficult for leaders to grasp this concept because they're inherently believing that they have to be the problem solver in the leadership role. They believe they are the ones to have the answer. They are paid to be to give the answers to things. Well, maybe not. Maybe the payment should be made for the ability to create the environment that creates new solutions. That might be a better measure of a leader's ability to create. But we tend to sort of still have our performance management systems, and the way that leaders get promoted is very much on the technical work that they do as opposed to the relational work that they do. So maybe a fundamental shift is needed in order for this to take root. But the idea that there is a certain way of leaders who are not working from a self-aware model or self-awareness of how they impact other people are going to take them a lot longer to reach that pinnacle of success in an adaptive way because they keep pushing back on what is needed to truly propel the collective forward.
Well, and it sounds like they may continue to make the same mistakes without awareness of a need to shift.
That's right.
And these mistakes it's called learning, by the way. It's not a bad thing. But if we keep repeating them, maybe it's not that constructive.
Yeah, and a lot of people are overwhelmed by the magnitude of transformation and change of this type. And I think I take a lesson from Agile here in that the best way to do it is to sort of bring it down to size by breaking this task down into smaller parts and creating some immediate wins and building the momentum. Again, the Zoysia grass principle, spreading the influence so that other people see the evidence of change and suddenly are compelled to want to be part of it too. And that's how you gain the ground in terms of transformation and change, is that everybody's in part of it, not just a handful of people who are driving it.
Hmm. Wow, you're saying a lot. I think there is a part two that is being invited here because there's so much to talk about. But I really appreciate your well, not just sharing your experience, but also your principles and philosophy and what you've seen, and how the connection between the practical day-to-day work of leadership and the loftier, more inspirational invitation to play my term here, bigger game and deeper game, some of which is triggered from your own experience, personal experience from a long time ago, and some of which continues to be inspired by your own faith and experience and work in different places. Thank you. You've got so much to share on this, and I need a new ink cartridge on my pen because I'm trying to capture so much. Where can people go if they want to learn more about you and your work?
I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Stephen G. Hart under LinkedIn. I work for, as you know, a good friend of ours, Sean Kent Hayashi. I work with an organization called the Professional Development Group. So we have a website. And make sure you put the in front, because there is another group called Professional Development Group. We are the Professional Development Group. And Sean is a wonderful collaborator and teacher, mentor, and friend, and has been for many, many years. I'm thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to be part of her team. And we do wonderful client-centric work all over the world. And it's such a pleasure to be part of that. So that's another place. So it's theprofessionaldevelopmentgroup.com is the work there. And then find me on LinkedIn under Stephen G. Hart, also the Professional Development Group. So those are the two. And of course,
Stephen with a V. Stephen with a V.
With a PH.
A PH. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Stefan. I often get Stefan in this country. And thank you, Andrew, for I know you're involved in similar kind of work and transformation and change. I've admired what you're doing and really appreciate. I feel like I'm talking to a kindred spirit here when I talk about my philosophy, because I know I've seen your work in action. I've seen the profound impact that you've had on people in this area when you and I work together. So thank you for all you've done in this course.
Thank you. Appreciate that affirmation and reflection. And yes, kindred spirit indeed. So thank you so much for your time. I just encourage and invite, please go forth, expand, teach. And I'd love to keep close contact on what you're doing. So I'm grateful for this reconnection and teaching. There's so much wisdom here. I look forward to listening back to this episode shortly and for us to talk again before too long. Appreciate it, Steve.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Spirituality and Leadership. If you want to access this wealth of knowledge and insight on a regular basis, subscribe to the show. Join the network of leaders who want to do and be better. Visit the site at spiritualityandleadership.com to catch all the episodes and learn more. Until next time, take good care of yourself.